When I joined the Royal Opera House a couple of years ago, we were keen to commission works from various composers. This house has a proud tradition in commissioning from British composers, but maybe less so in recent times from European composers. And so we looked across the whole spectrum in Europe, and it's quite exciting how many great and quite different composers are out there at the moment. One of the people who we instantly noticed because of his previous works, Bluthaus, for instance, the courage in tackling that subject, his strong sense of theatricality, personality, and then of course the microtonal universe, just made us feel that here's somebody who has something strong to say. He has courage, and he has a sense of creating something that we would never have heard before. And we thought it would be a very exciting commission for our main stage. And when we then understood that there was already a project being discussed with Deutsche Oper in Berlin, with the libretto by Fosse, who of course as Scandinavian I know very well, we thought this project was too good to be true and immediately jumped at it. But I must say that I like the idea also because it is quite different from the British operas we've presented here, and this whole universe feels so different. It's so simple, a story of a Norwegian fisherman who gets born and dies. On the surface it could look extremely sparse, even boring, and then of course the way that Fosse's poetry and Haas's music installs it with an incredible sense of poetry, of radicality even, and of how that sparseness actually makes you really go into another dimension, was just very intriguing. It's very hard to put words on music, of course, and it always becomes an intellectual exercise rather than really paying respect to the music. And I'm not sure that a composer's identity necessarily has something to do with nationality or what it says on your passport. But certainly I do think that Haas's music is very special. This microtonal technique that he uses means that it's not really, I mean, there are obviously no melodies, but there is also not quite the same. You can't navigate it in the way you normally navigate a modern opera. It is a soundscape, a sound world, and just like Fosse's libretto is not dramatic on the outside, is not outwardly dramatic in the sense you might expect an opera to be, it has a hypnotic almost effect. And the same with Haas's. When you listen to it, you're just not quite sure what it is, and you cannot quite, it feels a bit like it must be to be in exile or to be uprooted. You don't quite know how to navigate it, and yet these soundscapes are quite hypnotic and draws you in. So I would say that Haas is not just different from any composer in the UK I knew of, he's different from any composer in the world I know of, and that unique sound world was something we were keen to present. When we commission from a composer, I expect him or her to do whatever they feel is necessary. I still feel that Haas's world is quite unique, and I do think we get that experience, but I think what is wonderful about his work is, and when it really made sense to me, was when Haas said to us, I'm an expressionist, I write expressive music. And so where you might look at it as a very intellectual exercise, how to make this sound world work, it is actually a very expressive exercise. And once you understand that, I think you understand that in a quite physical sense when you're in the audience. I don't think most of the audience will care about what the technique is he uses to produce that effect. The effect is nonetheless that you are uprooted and slightly unsure about what you're listening to, and that certainly you understand that whatever it is, it has a strong emotional and I would say even physical effect on you. Of course, there's a big element of risk. We have an existing canon, and we even have a number of rarities that are rarely performed but are still masterworks that we can take off the shelf, and we know more or less what we're getting, we know what it will be. With a new opera, not only do you have the investment of having a composer, having a librettist spend years of their lives developing it, and having singers learn parts that they might never sing again, and that takes a lot of time to study, you also don't know what you're going to end up with. So it's a leap of faith. And all you can do is pick people who you think have something to say. We live in a time where it's all about the user, it's all about what the audience wants. But it's important to remember that really great art is about somebody having something to say. So finding extraordinary people who have something so burning that they have to say it, that they have something they want to communicate, and then allowing them, trying to support them in the best way to say what they want to say, even if you then risk having a failure. is essentially the key part of presenting new work. It's very important that we remember that when Mozart or Wagner or Verdi wrote their operas, hundreds, thousands of operas were being written and then thrown out, and even the first operas of the most famous composers are rarely performed. So writing an opera does involve a huge element of risk, and so does commissioning a work. And unlike when you perform other operas, you don't really know what it is you have until you have it on stage, and then it's too late to do anything about it, so to speak. But having said that, I'm passionate about letting composers, letting librettists use this incredible art form that I think describes the human soul and the human experience in a way that is deeply necessary to us, also in our time. It's important to me that we let our time also meet the medium of opera, simply because I think opera does something that no other art form does, and something that in a time where we use words and numbers and logic to understand who we are as humans, we really need art as a corrective to that, to remind us that life is irrational, is illogical, is more than words and numbers. And opera is a beautiful way to do that. I can't imagine, having heard Morning and Evening, this opera with any other combination than Haas and Fosse. They have in common that they are both quite expressive and yet sparse. So that sparsity of almost austerity of expression, combined with being very, very expressive in handling the biggest themes that exist, the birth of a child and the death of a person, of a self, is as extreme as it can be, and yet it is cleansed away to the real core of what the human experience is. So I think it goes fantastically well together, but it must have been incredible that Fosse has been able to imagine how this would translate, if he has been able to imagine how it would translate and do the libretto so well. And it was funny to hear how Haas, when he got the libretto from Fosse had actually not necessarily set the scenes from the book that he had expected there to be, but that the libretto was quite different. But it's been, in my opinion, one of those unique partnerships where we are very lucky when a composer and a librettist really find each other. There are many other famous examples of composers finding their voice through a librettist, and I certainly think this is one of them. With any new opera, the hope is always, of course, that it will get further productions, that the production we do on opening night will not be the only and defining one. And I've already heard from some people from the business who came to see the dress rehearsal that they thought that A, it's a masterpiece, but B, that it's so different, that it really makes you sit up. There are, at the end of the day, quite a number of new operas being written, thankfully, but many of them are in the same kind of region, if you will, and this one really truly is different and makes you sit up and think, what is this? I would think that this is a piece that actually has a chance to travel far, but it does need, even in further presentations, people who have the courage to say, here is something which is so against everything in our time, where everything needs to be quick, fast, entertaining and flashy. The life of a Norwegian fisherman is hardly flashy. To have the courage to ask us to sit and listen to that. By doing that, and by sitting through the whole work, you do enter a state of mind which is different from the everyday life, which is so different from our normal world, that it really brings us to what is important in existence. So yeah, I do think and hope that Morgen and Abend will have a further life.